required. We've got 150 minutes, guys. You do not have a full 150 minutes to sit answering because you need to do an analysis of your required before you jump in. Okay, for those of you who have never watched a tutorial, pay attention now. You need to read through all of the requireds to understand exactly what is expected of you, so that you can even see now what the last question is, so that once you know, you can rank your questions according to what you are more comfortable with. There's no point in starting with question 1 if you don't know what to do with question 1, because you're going to spend all your time trying to find the answers. You need to go to the question that you are most comfortable with, the question you get most excited about when you've read it, and go and get those marks. Okay, you will start to gain confidence in your question, which will put your stress levels at ease and your panic come right down, because you will be confident knowing that you are getting marks because you're getting the work done. You'll probably use less time than you need to, so you're banking some time to apply to some of the other questions at a later stage. Okay, so there's so many good reasons for doing this, and in addition to that, your brain is still working on all the other requireds it's read, even though you're not focusing there. Okay, your brains can multitask better than what we can, and so that's exactly what's happening. So it's important to do all of that. You should also now be calculating your time for each question, so that you stick to the time allowed, because you don't want to get to that last question and realize you actually do know it. The last question you've left, so it won't necessarily be the last question of the exam. Realize you actually do know what to do, but you don't have time to do anything. And now, where there was a question that was out of 10, that you spent half an hour on putting 30 marks down, but it was out of 10, you can't get more than 10, you are now in a situation where that time you could have used on this last question, which you might actually get full marks for. Okay, so guys, exam technique is so crucial, but it doesn't come overnight. You have to practice this when you do your questions at home, so that when you get into the exam, you stop when your time is up, even if you know you've got more to write for a question, because it's likely that you have ranked correctly the last question you weren't comfortable with, and so you can spend a little bit of time there and then go, you know what, I'm not going to get any marks here. I don't know this stuff. I'm going to go back and use the time that I have left on the questions that I moved on from and go and get more marks for those. Okay, but the reason why you need to do this, guys, is because provided you're comfortable with a topic, the allocated time you've got is sufficient to get your marks for that topic. So going over that allocated time means you're either putting down more marks, but you're not going to get them because you've maxed out, or you're starting to repeat, which means you're not getting them because you've already got the point the first time, or you're just rambling on and not getting marks. So either of those, you are not getting marks for. Okay, so that's a nice reality check. So let's start. Question 1. With reference to working paper 1, so I'm only looking here. Discuss any concerns. So concerns would be negatives, non-compliance. You have with the preliminary engagement questionnaire completed by Vic Matfield, and any further concerns you have with RWC's client acceptance procedures. So I'm only going to that working paper. I'm going to discuss the concerns with the answers to the questions. Okay, so first, concerns with his answers, and then 2, I'm just going to look at the client's pre-engagement steps, and ultimately looking at the questionnaire itself to see if there was anything missing. Okay, so I need to make sure I'm comfortable with pre-engagement here. I know that there's 2 standards that can help me with pre-engagement from an auditing perspective. I've got ISA 220 and ISQC 1. Okay, you don't have to know the names of those guys, but you should know that if you need help for pre-engagement, there are some standards in the auditing standards: quality control for an audit, and then quality control for a firm. And I can go there to the acceptance paragraphs to see what I should be doing for pre-engagements. Okay, if you are comfortable with those, which you should be, you should know that for pre-engagements, I need to, number one, consider the client's integrity. And then number two, for the auditors, we've got to consider, have they got the necessary skills, competence, time, and resources, and then can they comply with the ethical requirements? So I know the CPC is huge there. So I'm looking to use the sections in the CPC that are relevant to the information in the question with regards to the auditor's ethical compliance from that pre-engagement questionnaire. I know that there is a section on acceptance of an engagement, so that's going to be relevant. And then I just need to go back and see if there's anything else that's obviously CPC related there. In answering a question that's got CPC, remember you have to comply with the framework, conceptual framework, which means I would have to put down the threat to the fundamental principle or to independence. I would then have to discuss the significance and then provide a safeguard. So even at a pre-engagement stage, I need to do that. It's out of 15 marks. I've got 22 minutes here. Stick to that time and I should be good. Question 2. Refer to the background information and working paper 2. So I've got to go to 2 areas in the question. And describe any additional risks of material misstatements at the financial statement level of RWC for the year ended 31 July 2019. Additional risks, which means they would have picked up some risks already. I don't want to repeat them, so these need to be new risks. Risks of material misstatements are my inherent and control risks. So I'm only looking at the risks that the financials are misstated. I'm not looking at any risk that the auditor doesn't detect misstatements. And it's at a financial statement level, so I don't need to be looking at things that are specific to a balance or a transaction. I want risks that could affect the financials as a whole. It's for 10 marks, which means I've got 15 minutes to do this. I also know that there are a couple of standards that can help me with risks, and they're in the appendix. So your appendix 4, ISA 315, which is the risk assessment standard. So once again, you don't need to know the number, but you need to know that I have a standard that tells me how I go about identifying risks, which is 315, and then 240, which is the fraud risk specifically. So if I don't, or I can't pick up risks by reading the information in the question, then if I go and open up those appendixes, I can see some examples of risks to then go back into those 2 areas that I'm limited to see if any of those examples are there. Okay, this should be a very easy question, potentially be your first question that you choose because you should be very comfortable with risks at the financial statement level. Don't forget though, you have 2 workings you need to go look at. Background information and working paper 2. Question 3. With reference to working paper 3, so I'm only going here again. Identify the weaknesses in the temporary employment process. Thank goodness, because when we read through that, we picked up lots of issues with their controls. So guys, weaknesses would be missing controls, or I can see that there is a control that is lacking in its function. So the missing ones are a little bit harder because there's no indication in the question that the control is not there. You need to know when you're reading there should be a control here and it's not. Whereas a control that's there but it's lacking, you can see the control there but you can see it's not doing its job. Okay, so two things when I'm looking for weaknesses. And then for each weakness identified, describe the internal control that should be designed and implemented to address the weakness. Okay, so now I want to then discuss a recommended control that could address those risks. Okay, and guys, what you'll start to see when you're going through these and you're picking up a weakness in a control, you will generally be picking up a missing control or saying there's no authorization or whatever. So it's easy then to provide the control because it's just about saying, oh, I said there was none of that. It's now about putting that there. You can see it's 15 marks, 15 marks. So provide your answer in a tabular format where you put the weakness and then the internal control. 1 mark for each. I need to be picking up at least 15 weaknesses and providing 15 controls. Okay, I've got 22.5 minutes for each. So when I combine this, I've got 45 minutes. Okay, I shouldn't need a full portion of time for my internal control recommended. So this is a question that you should be able to bank a little bit of time because you don't have to go into the question to find a control. As soon as you found the weakness, you could put down a control immediately. So that's exactly how I would do it. Find a weakness, put a control. Find a weakness, put a control. Okay, don't go and try and find all the weaknesses and then try and put controls after. Do 1 point and get a full 2 marks for 1 point. Okay, what am I going to have to do here? I'm going to have to consider my payroll cycle. What are the controls that need to be in the payroll cycle? What are the documents? So that I can see if there's missing documents, which means there's missing controls. And again, what are the controls so that I can see if there's missing controls. Remember your controls or key controls. Segregation of duties, isolation of responsibilities, authorization, access controls, reconciliation, annual source document controls, pre-numbering, and so on. And then we have, as an entire full section, your program application controls. So all of those screen aids, program checks, logs form part of your key controls. Okay, so I'm going to have to look for where these are all missing, what documents are missing, and then be able to discuss my concerns with that. There is a layout and structure mark, so make sure you set it out the way they have recommended to get that mark. Okay, question 4. Using the information in working papers 2 and 4, I know on the screen here it shows a 1, but it's correct in your document being a 2. So once again, 2 working papers here. Formulate the substantive audit procedures. Substantive mean I need to do general procedures, analytical procedures, and test of detail procedures that you need to perform in order to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence with regard to the legality. The legality, so is it legal, lawful, of the Director's Resolution passed on the 25th of March 2019 in terms of the Companies Act. So now, all I'm doing here is going into the Companies Act to find what are the requirements for the decision. So what was that resolution that was passed? What are the requirements for that? And then I'm going to go and develop a test for each requirement. Okay, my test is going to be inspecting, observing, reperforming, so on, my substantive procedure to ensure that they have complied. Really important, it's a director's resolution. So whenever there's any type of resolution, I know that there needs to be notice for that resolution. I need to know that when they go to meet for it, there needs to be a quorum. And I know that they have to have a certain number of votes. So all of those need to be tested, even though that information won't necessarily be with the requirements. Okay, in this situation, if you don't remember, you'll go back to your working paper, but the resolution was for a loan to a director related party. So I have to go and see what all of those requirements are and then develop a test for all of those. In addition, because it is a related party to a director, there's also director's financial interest. And so I need to go and test all of those requirements. That he did leave the meeting, wasn't involved, didn't partake in the documentation, and so on. 15 marks, guys. This is a nice, easy question, because as soon as you've picked up what the resolution was or the section in the Companies Act, you just need to go and test that those were met. It is ultimately testing the occurrence of this decision. I don't need to test anything else. Completeness, accuracy, cutoff, classification, presentation, disclosure, because they only ask for legality in terms of the Companies Act. Okay, if they had asked for substantive procedures for the decision, yes, then you would need to go and test the rest of those. Has it been recorded accurately in the financials and so on? They haven't, so I'm just doing compliance with the Companies Act. Okay, you should be able to get full marks for that question. 15 minutes, which means you have, once again, 22 minutes to answer. B, identify and discuss any non-compliance with the Companies Act and King for 10 marks each. Nice question here, guys. Whenever we have this, we need to, 1, put down the theory from the specific legislation, and then 2, apply the question or the information in the question to show non-compliance. I'm only looking for non-compliance, not compliance, so make sure I don't go and show where they are adhering to those requirements. But look at that. If it's a mark for the theory and a mark for applying, then ultimately I should be finding 5 non-compliances of each. Okay, if I can pick up more and I've got the time to put them, I'll do that. But if I don't try and add more. Stick with the 5 because that's how it gets marked. You've got 15 minutes for each. But what you might find is that where you find a non-compliance with the Companies Act, it's also a non-compliance with the King. So you will be banking time there. Because as you put it down for Companies Act, quickly go and put it down for King too, and then you haven't had to go and research and find a whole new non-compliance. Because a lot of the points when it comes to directors' conduct are the same between the two legislations. Okay, finally, question 5. Refer to working paper 5, so I'm only looking here, and discuss the accounting treatment of the court finding. Okay, so accounting treatment, I'm only looking at how accounting says that should be recorded. Okay, so that's an accounting question for 5 marks. And formulate the substantive audit procedures that you need to perform in order to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence regarding the accounting of the court findings in the financial statements of RWC for the year ended 31 July 2019. So once I've discussed how it should be accounted for, I need to go and test that is how it was accounted. Okay, and remember, it will probably be a journal showing date, description, and amount. And so you're going to have to test date, details, amount. Already there, I've got 4 marks. Okay, I must make sure the substantive order procedures include general procedures, analytical procedures, and test of detail. I must make sure I'm using the correct assertions for testing what this was. And we know this was a post-reporting date event. Okay, and that's why I say it would be a journal that you would be testing. For 4 marks, so I don't want to go into too much detail for all my assertions. Just do the obvious one. This is how it should have been accounted for, so how can I go and test? Is it in that, is the date right? Is it in that account? Is the amount correct? And then I can be done. Okay, so that is ultimately for 9 marks, which means you have 13 minutes. Now you'll see, guys, we have spent a lot of time here, which hasn't been incorporated in the minutes that I've given you for each question. But you'll find in your exam, there will be more marks available for communication skills. Okay, I've only got 1 here. But in the actual exam, you've probably got about 5 or 6 for communication skills, which we don't incorporate into working out our minutes. So you've already got those minutes that you can use for this analysis. But then, where you've put down, I've got 22 minutes. Make that 20 minutes. We've got 15 minutes. Make that 14 minutes. Try and reduce your time to account for the time that you've used here. Work out how much time you've used here by looking at your analysis and where you are in terms of the time consumed. And then try and reduce what you've got available to account for that. Okay, but it's very important that you do this, because now through this you know how much time you have, and through this you know where you want to start, and through this you have answered a lot of the easier parts to each of these questions that you can now go straight from here, put them on your solution without having to go back into the scenario. Okay, so very important to do this. So guys, I'm going to start with question 1.